Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Today we are going to touch on comparative advantage. Okay, we take a look at the tables. So table 1 shows production possibilities before trade. Okay, so in this case you can see that if country A use all of the resources to produce only good X, it means that country A can produce 120 units of good X. And then if the country wants to produce only good Y, it means that it does not produce any good X. It means that this country can produce 20 units of good Y with the available resources. Okay, so the same thing for country B. So if country B wants to produce only good X, it means that it can produce 40 units of good X. Okay, so it means that if suppose that a country B has only 100 units of labor in the country, it means that it will use all of the resources that it has. It means that it will use all of the 100 units of labor. Okay, so same thing for good Y. So if country B wants to produce only good Y, so it means that it does not produce any good X. So country B can produce 20 units of good Y. Okay, so this is actually the production possibilities before trade. Okay, so now we move to, okay, this is actually the table that shows production before trade. Okay, so before this we know that if country A use all of the resources to produce only good X, it means that the country can produce 120, right? So in this case, you know, if the country wants to produce both of the goods before having trade, you know, before trade, so of course these countries, you know, these two countries wants to enjoy consuming both of the goods. Okay, if the countries wants to enjoy consuming both of the goods, it means that they have to produce both of the goods by themselves. Okay, so if they want to produce by themselves, it means that, you know, without trade, so country A, before this, country A can produce 120 units of good X with the available resources. Okay, it means that country A use all of its resources. Okay, it can produce 120. So now if country A wants to produce both of the goods, it means that it needs to allocate some resources to produce good X and the other resources, you know, the other resources to produce good Y. Okay, so in this case you can see that country A allocate, you know, use half of the resources to produce good X. It means that it can produce 60 units of good X. Okay, because why? Because just now if it use all of the resources, it can produce 120, but if it uses only half of the resources, it can produce 60 units of good X. And then if it has used half of the resources to produce good X, it means that the other half it used to produce good Y. So before this, if it uses all of the resources to produce good Y only, it can produce 20 units of good Y. But if it uses only half of the resources, it means that it can produce only 10 units of good Y. Okay, so the same thing as country B. So if country B wants to produce good X and at the same time it wants to produce good Y, so it cannot produce as many as in the number of production in table 1, right? Okay, so you can see that country B, before this, country B, if it uses all of the resources to produce only good X, it means that it can produce 40 units of good X. But in this case, because country B wants to produce both of the goods, so it means that it needs to use some of the resources to produce good Y, and the other resources will be used to produce good Y. Good X, sorry, it will use half of the resources to produce good X and the other resources will be used to produce good Y. So before this, country B can produce good X, 40 units of good X with the available resources. It means with all of the resources. So if it uses half of the resources only, it means that it can produce half of the units of half of the productions of good X. Okay, just now it's actually 40, now it's actually 20. okay, because it uses only half of the resources to produce good X. So it means that it can produce from 40, it can produce 20 only. Okay, so the other half will be used to produce good Y, so it means that this country can produce 10. Before this, if the country produce all of the resources to produce only good Y, so it means that the country B can produce 20. So now the country use only half of the resources. So from 20, so it can produce only 10 units of good Y. Okay, so this is actually total world production. Okay, in this country, we assume that we have two countries only. Okay, so if we have two countries, it means that this total production of good X and then total of productions of good Y, so actually reflects total world production. Okay, so it reflects total world production. Okay, so 60 plus 20, so 60 plus 20, so you will get total world production, which is equal to 80. So this is actually the same thing. So if country A produce country A produce 10 units of good Y, and then country B produce 10 units of good Y, so the total world production is actually equal to 20. Okay. So now, if according to David Ricardo, so if both of the countries wants to have trade, so the first thing that we have to look is actually we have to look at their opportunity cost. Okay, we have to compare which country has a lower opportunity cost. Okay, so remember this country A produce. Okay, so you have to refer your table 1 just now. So this, and then you will get your opportunity cost. Okay, so you cannot refer to table 2, but you have to refer to table 1. Okay, so country A can produce 120 units of good X, and then country A also can produce 120 units of good Y. Okay, so if they use if they want to produce only one of the goods. Okay, so in this case, you can see you can calculate the opportunity cost. Okay, so if you want to calculate the opportunity cost to produce 1 units of good X, okay, so country A will give up 1/6. Okay, 1/6. So if the country wants to produce good Y, so it has to give up 6 units of good X, right? This is actually 6 units of good X. So remember, if you want to produce on 1 unit of good X, for example, so it means that you have to put your the number of good X on the bottom, and then the number of good Y on the top. Okay, because you want to produce 1 unit of good X, and then how many units of good Y you have to give up. So you need to put or to place the number of good X on the bottom. Okay, on the bottom, and then you have to put the number of good Y on the top. Okay, so and then the same thing for country B. So if you want to produce if country B wants to produce a unit of good X, so how many units of good Y this country needs to give up. So you have to place the number of good X on the bottom, and then on the number of good Y on the top. Okay, so 1 unit of good X, to produce 1 unit of good X, country B need to give up half of units of good Y. Okay, half a unit of good Y. Okay, so the same thing, if country B wants to produce 1 unit of good Y, so it means that it needs to give up 2 units of good X. Okay, so you have to, if you know that country B wants to produce 1 unit of good Y, so how many good X it has to give up. So you have to place the number of good Y on the bottom and the number of good X on the top. Okay, so you will get 2. Okay, so how many units of good X it has to give up? It has to give up 2 to produce 1 unit of good Y. So country A need to give up 6 because it needs to produce 1 unit of good Y, so it needs to give up 6 units of good X. And then you have to compare the opportunity cost. Okay, which country has a lower opportunity cost? In this case, it is very clear that between these two countries, you can see that between these two countries, to produce 1 unit of good X, which country has a lower opportunity cost? So it is very clear that country A has a lower opportunity cost if it wants to produce 1 unit of good X. Okay, so country B has a higher opportunity cost, and therefore it means that country A uh, has a comparative advantage, okay, in the productions of good X. While you can see that here in this case, or the opportunity uh, cost of producing 1 unit of good Y, so country B has a lower opportunity cost compared to country A. So you can see that to produce only 1 unit of good Y, so country B need to give up only 2, but while country A wants to produce 1 unit of good Y, it has to give up 6 units of good X. So it means that country B has a comparative advantage in producing good Y. So it means that, you know, good Y, country B will specialize in the productions of good Y, while country A will specialize in the productions of good X. Because of what? Because country A has a lower opportunity cost in producing good X, and then country B has a lower opportunity cost in producing good Y. So country A will specialize in producing good X, and country B will specialize in producing good Y. Okay. After you decide which country, after you determine which country will specialize in good X and which country will specialize in good Y, and therefore it is very clear that country A will specialize in the productions of good X, and then country B will specialize in the productions of good Y. Okay, so it means that you have to refer to your table 1. So table 1, if the country use of all of the resources, so it means that it does not produce any good Y, because this country will specialize in good X, and therefore the country A can produce 120 units of good X without producing any units of good Y. Okay, so since we know that country B will specialize in the productions of good Y, so it means that the country will produce no units of good X, and then the country will produce 20 units of good Y. So you have to refer to table 1 just now. Okay, so total world production is equal to 120 units of good X will be produced in the world, and then 20 units of good Y will be produced in the world, because we have 2 countries only. This is actually our assumption. Okay, so now we want to get net gains after specialization. We want to calculate these net gains after specialization. How do I get this table 5? So how to get this table 5? So you have to compare between this table 4 and table 2. Okay, so before production before trade, so it means that this is also production before specialization. Okay, this is actually also production before specialization. So you have to compare these tables and with these tables. Okay, before trade, so you can see that before trade, country A can produce 60 units of good X, and at the same time country A will produce 10 units of good Y, and then country B can produce 20 units of good X, and at the same time the country can produce 10 units of good Y. So the total world production is equal to 80, and the total world productions of good Y is actually 20. Okay, so now if we specialize, if both of the countries will specialize in one good only, so it means that country A will produce 120 units of good X, and then it will not produce any good Y. So country B will produce nothing, no units of good X, and then it will produce 20 units of good Y. And so therefore the total world production is equal to the total world productions of good X is actually 120, and the total world production of good Y is actually 20. Okay, so if you want to get net gains after specializations, you can see that the units of good X will increase from 60, it will increase to 120. Okay, so this is the same thing. The country A, you can see that before trade or before specialization, country A will produce only 10. Now it will not produce anything. So it means that it is going to be negative 10 here, because it decreases from 10 to 0. And this one, it will increase, right, from 60 to 120. So it will increase by 60. Okay, country B. So if we look at country B, so country country B, before specializations or before trade, it can produce 20 units of good X, and now it will not produce anything. So it means that it will decrease by 20, right? 20 0 minus 20, so you will get negative 20 here. Okay, so the same thing here. So before this, country B produced only 10. Now it will increase its production to 20. So you can see that it will increase by 10. So you can, that's why I put positive here, positive 10, because it increases. This actually negative 10 because it decreases. So the same thing here. This is actually positive, means that it will increase, and this is actually will decrease. Okay, so total world production, you can see that before this, before specialization or before trade, the world production actually is equal to 80. Now it will increase to 120. So it means that it increases by 40. So 20, from 20, it will not change anything. It will remain the same. It will remain constant or remain the same, remain unchanged. So from 20, both of the actually the total world production remains the same, which is equal to 20. So you can see that you will put here 0, because it does not increase and it does not decrease. Okay, so if you look at this, whether both of the country can get gains or not, so you can see that actually we can increase the number of production for good X, right? So it means that it is good to have trade, because you can see that both of the country can enjoy the total world production increases by 40. So it is actually good to have trade. Okay, so that's all for today. Thank you.